Hello, I'm Floyd Stokes, your instructor for AJ3, Introduction to Corrections at College of the Redwoods. These series of PowerPoint videos are meant to give you an overview of each chapter of the text, but you will still need to thoroughly read each chapter. Today I want to discuss Chapter 7 of our text, which is titled Managing Prisons and Prisoners. This chapter has 5 learning objectives. 1. Outline the development and organization of the federal prison system. 2. Outline the development and organization of the state prison system. 3. Explain how prisoners are classified and assigned in prison. 4. Describe the various jobs and functions of prison staff. And 5. Summarize the privatization of prisons. All right, let's get started. Contemporary prisons in this country have 2 primary purposes, security and treatment. Let's examine how prisons evolved to this point, starting with federal prisons. Prior to 1891, most offenders convicted of violating federal laws were placed in state prisons and county jails. In 1891, Congress authorized building of 3 federal penitentiaries for men in Atlanta, Georgia, Leavenworth, Kansas, and McNeil Island, Washington. In 1928, the first federal women's reformatory opened at Alderson, West Virginia. In 1930, Congress provided needed centralization by establishing the Federal Bureau of Prisons, or BOP as it is known, as part of the Department of Justice. The Bureau of Prisons had 3 goals. 1. Ensure consistent, centralized administration of the federal prison system. 2. Professionalize the prison service. And 3. Provide more progressive and humane care for federal inmates. The Federal Bureau of Prisons has sought to achieve these goals, and in doing so has often served as a model for state correctional systems. Today, the Bureau of Prisons consists of 116 institutions and 22 community corrections offices, and it is responsible for more than 200,000 prisoners. The country is divided into 6 geographic regions, each with a regional director. The Counterterrorism Unit, or CTU, was established in 2006. Its responsibilities include identifying and validating inmate involvement in terrorist activities, monitoring and analyzing terrorist-inmate communications, and providing counterterrorism training. Table 7.1 on page 108 lists the percentage of inmates and staff by gender, race, and offense. Drug offenses at 51% account for the largest percentage of inmates. There are 5 Bureau of Prisons security levels. Minimum security, low security, medium security, high security, and administrative maximum, or ADMAX. The features of each security level include prison design, perimeter, and staff-to-inmate ratio. Page 109 shows photos of facilities at each security level, including a detailed description of the features ranging from no perimeter fencing to highly secured perimeters and solitary confinement for the extremely dangerous or escape-prone. In 1991, the Bureau of Prisons began constructing the first federal correctional complex in Florence, Colorado, using a new design concept with several correctional facilities of different security levels at a single site. There are now 14 such complexes located across the country. State prison systems are typically operated by the state's Department of Corrections or a state agency with a similar name. In California, it is the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR. The CDCR operates all state adult prisons and juvenile facilities and oversees a variety of community correctional facilities. Other key terms include design capacity, which is the number of inmates that facility planners or architects intended for the facility. Rated capacity, which is the maximum number of beds or inmates allocated by a rating official to institutions in the states. Dispersion approach. Prison administrators spread troublemakers to prisons throughout the system or in various units of the prison. And concentration approach, where prisoners are grouped together in special prisons or special units within a prison, and their activities and movements are severely restricted and highly monitored. Overcrowding is a problem in most states, with states operating at an average of 114% of design capacity and 108% of rated capacity. The problem is especially notable in Alabama and California, where prisons are at more than 170% of design capacity, and in California, Illinois, and Washington, where prisons operate at more than 130% of rated capacity. There are now 4 security levels at state facilities. Minimum security facilities are institutions where inmates have considerable personal freedom and more relaxed supervision. Medium security facilities are institutions where inmates receive more supervision than at minimum security prisons, but still have considerable freedom to move around to work assignments and programming activities. Maximum security facilities are designed for the fullest possible supervision, control, and surveillance of general population inmates. These are also known as close security prisons. And then finally, supermax prisons, which are prisons at the highest security level, with prisoners isolated from the general population and from each other in what are known as control units or secured housing units or SHUs. Pelican Bay State Prison outside Crescent City is an example of a supermax prison. The more recently constructed maximum security prisons tend to rely on a double fence perimeter, usually including coiled razor wire or an electric fence, rather than high walls. When the court sentences offenders to imprisonment, the judge has no control over the facility at which the offender will serve time or the treatment programs in which they will participate. Those tasks belong to a team of correctional experts that specializes in determining the risk each offender poses to the community and within the prison, as well as the offender's treatment needs. The process and procedures by which this is accomplished is called classification. The earliest versions of classification were to separate prisoners on a basis of such simple and obvious criteria as gender, age, and offense seriousness. It was not until the 20th century that classification was viewed as a crucial element in prison management. That began in the late 1920s with the efforts of F. Lovell Bixby, a psychologist in charge of the classification division of New Jersey's prisons. He developed a classification procedure that standardized testing of newly sentenced offenders. By the 1950s, classification was being implemented throughout country's prisons as a way of separating inmates based on security risk present and determining what treatment programs might benefit them the most. Essentially, concern over the risk the offender posed to public safety and other prisoners was primary, and treatment needs were secondary. A federal court ruled in the late 1970s that classification was not constitutionally required, but must be rational and reasonable rather than arbitrary and capricious. The result was that procedures were changed to be more objective than subjective. Objective classification systems have a factual, impartial, and observable base rather than the intuitive footing of subjective systems, and they have two stages, external and internal. External classification determines a prisoner's custody level, which in turn determines the prison where the inmate begins serving the sentence. Of importance at this stage is determining the risk posed by the inmate, not to the public, but rather the risk of escape or to cause management problems. Internal classification establishes the prisoner's housing, program, and work assignments. Table 7.2 and Table 7.3 on page 113 discuss risk and needs assessments and features of an objective classification system. Classification tools such as the Level of Services Inventory Revised, or LSI-R, the Adult Internal Management System, or AIMS, and the Case Needs Identification and Analysis, or CNIA, assessment instruments are discussed on page 115. Research has identified a variety of factors that predict recidivism or the likelihood that the offender will repeat his or her criminal behavior. Both static or fixed past factors and dynamic or changeable factors can be criminogenic in the sense that they cause or tend to cause criminal behavior. The interviews, tests, and evaluation instruments used during the internal classification process can identify these criminogenic factors or needs. Prisoners are then assigned to treatment programs designed to address their particular set of dynamic criminogenic needs, a process called responsivity. Because criminogenic needs are dynamic, the classification process must include procedures to keep pace with changing risks and needs of prisoners. The reclassification procedures provide an opportunity to reevaluate the inmate's prison risk assessment and needs assessment. For example, good behavior may allow a custody level change from medium to minimum, and if an inmate completed his or her GED, he or she could now enter a vocational training program. A prison operates only through the efforts of people in a wide variety of occupations. Even in smaller facilities, the warden manages employees with responsibilities in areas ranging from laundry and food services to facility maintenance and recreation. As facility size increases, there may be positions related to prison industries and the need for medical services. Of the many occupational areas represented by prison staff, two are of particular importance in this chapter. Prison staff members responsible for security are the correctional officers, or COs, who maintain order and enforce prison rules and regulations. Nationwide, this group is mostly white, non-Hispanic, and male, but in some states, women and minorities represent a large proportion of COs. Figure 7.5 on page 117 shows that COs comprise about 60 to 66% of correctional facility staff. Although correctional officers have been perceived as unskilled and poorly paid, in actuality most must be intelligent, well-trained, and have extensive interpersonal skills. However, it is true that in many areas of the country, many are poorly paid for what they are expected to do. The second group of prison staff highlighted in this chapter is made up of members of the treatment staff. These people are responsible for such areas as counseling, recreation, religion, and education. The treatment staff may include psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, health, ethical, educational, vocational, or recreational workers. The counseling staff may be involved in programs such as cognitive behavioral therapy, anger management, substance abuse therapy, and others. A larger problem is having sufficient staff qualified to work with the mentally ill. As we have discussed in class, the problem of mentally ill prisoners is serious and substantial, and by all indications likely to worsen. A health examination or mental health screening is performed on each newly admitted inmate that usually includes a review of the medical screening, behavioral observations, and inquiry into any mental health history, and an assessment of suicide potential. Traditionally, prison management has been carried out by public employees in public facilities, but that has been changing in the 21st century. Not all, but most states today have some prison facilities operated for or by private, for-profit companies. The companies make money by contracting with federal, state, or local governments to provide housing, security, and programming for prisoners. About 8% of all prisoners in the country are now being held in private facilities. One of the largest private prison companies is Corrections Corporations of America. Figure 7.6 on page 120 shows the percent of state prisoners in private facilities as of the end of 2009. Currently, about 130,000 state and federal prisoners are held in privately operated corrections facilities. The lack of private prisons in the Midwest and Northeast is directly related to the strength of labor unions in those regions and successful resistance to any significant attempts to privatize. A major argument for privatization is that private prisons are cost-effective, but some research suggests there is little evidence that private prisons are cheaper to operate. Okay, to summarize this chapter, the federal government began operating prisons in the 1890s, but the system of operating federal prisons was not established until 1930 with the creation of the Bureau of Prisons, or BOP. State prisons are operated by a state agency with a variety of classifications. Prisoners are classified according to risks and needs. The two types of personnel within a prison are correctional officers and treatment staff. Privatization is an old concept that is gaining new attention. Before I close, be sure to read page 122 of the text that discusses the case of mixed gender supervision in prison.